During the Cold War, the United States wasn't just defending democracy, it was strategically gathering intelligence on how to reshape its own society. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, American agencies, think tanks, and universities sent scholars, diplomats, and intelligence operatives to Germany, France, and the Soviet Union to study Marxist strategies firsthand. They analyzed the psychological tactics used to control populations, the propaganda methods used to dismantle traditional values, and the ways revolutionaries had successfully overthrown governments. From China, they studied the impact of Maoist indoctrination, particularly how radical youth movements were mobilized to destroy history and culture. From India and Japan, they examined Eastern philosophy and how it could be used to detach individuals from absolute truth. These ideas weren't just studied. They were brought back to American universities, media, and institutions, ready to be unleashed as a new form of cultural warfare. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, as America sought to counter the Soviet Union's influence, the U.S. government and academic institutions brought over European intellectuals from the Frankfurt School, a group of Marxist scholars who had fled Nazi Germany. These thinkers, including Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, and Erich Fromm, introduced critical theory, a strategy that sought to deconstruct Western institutions by framing them as oppressive systems. Marcuse, who would later be called the father of the New Left, played a key role in transforming Marxism into a cultural weapon. His 1955 book, Eros and Civilization, blended Karl Marx's ideas with Freudian psychoanalysis, arguing that traditional morality and family structures were forms of oppression. This would become the foundation for the sexual revolution and identity politics. As men were drafted into the Vietnam War, 1964 to 1973, leaving families without fathers and husbands, feminist movements surged, fueled by a radicalized version of Marxism applied to gender. The National Organization for Women, NOW, founded in 1966, pushed not just for workplace equality, but for an overhaul of gender roles and family structures. At the same time, Lisa Karp and the Weathermen Underground, a Maoist-inspired communist group, formed the National Organization of Women in 1969, carrying out bombings and violent protests with the goal of overthrowing the U.S. government. These groups adopted cultural Marxist strategies, which argued that revolution should happen not through class warfare, but by dismantling Western values from within, starting with the family and identity itself.
Why are we here today?
To make a revolution.
What kind of revolution?
The Cultural Revolution.
And how do we make a cultural revolution?
By destroying the American family.
How do we destroy the American family?
By destroying the American patriarch.
And how do we destroy the American patriarch?
By destroying monogamy.
How do we destroy monogamy?
By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, and homosexuality.
During the 1950s to 1970s, the CIA's MK-Ultra experiments explored ways to reprogram the human mind, a form of psychological warfare that tested ways to manipulate perception, break identities, and control populations. Messages of brokenness and unworthiness became common in media and academia, conditioning people to reject traditional values and embrace self-reinvention through external ideologies. Meanwhile, Buddhism was strategically introduced as a cultural alternative to Christianity. Figures like Alan Watts popularized Eastern mysticism in the 1950s, pushing detachment from moral absolutes and blending it with psychology. By the 1970s, meditation and New Age spirituality had become mainstream, promoting self-centered enlightenment rather than biblical salvation. By the 1980s and 1990s, the seeds planted during the Cold War had fully taken root. Marcuse's students became professors, media executives, and policymakers, ensuring that Marxist and Freudian ideas would dominate American culture. The long march through the institutions, a strategy openly discussed by radical thinkers, was complete. Schools, churches, and governments had all been infiltrated, not through military force, but through cultural revolution. The Cold War never really ended. The battlefield just changed. The ideologies that America once fought overseas are now embedded in every aspect of our society. But here's the truth. None of this was accidental. It was a calculated strategy to redefine morality, family, and faith itself. The question now is, will we wake up? Will we recognize these tactics and stand for truth? Because the war for the soul of this nation is far from over. Know the truth. Stand for truth.